Ari Louis Show.
All right, welcome everyone to today's episode of the Ari Louis Show here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. If you'd like to email the program throughout the entire show, you can do so at arilouisshow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station at IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio@gmail.com. And if you'd like to make a financial contribution, you can do so through my PayPal account, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. Again, the PayPal is different than the station email, so I will say that one more time. IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com is the PayPal. Ever wanted to know what is the situation regarding financial news and the tax world and tax authorities? On the line to discuss that from Broide and Company, CPA here in Israel, Mr. Jeff Broide. How are you doing out there, sir?
Great, thanks. Good to be on your show.
Yes, indeed. So let's talk about tax world, because the tax authority really has a lot of power, not just in Israel, not just the United States, really the whole world. Should people be concerned about the tax world and the tax authority and their power over a lot of different things, and that their power is not so well checked?
That probably is in the realm of political philosophy as well. But there's no question today that tax authorities around the globe, majorly their powers and their reaches, certainly following the model of the IRS in the States.
So the additional model of the IRS, was the IRS the first model of its kind, and then other countries adopted that and took their model to use for their own particular nations?
Pretty much so. I think the IRS in recent years has become a much more dominant force internationally. I think tax authorities in other countries have learned that there's something in it for them too. The level of cooperation today, basically through organizations such as the OECD, most of the Western countries are members, they're all learning from one another. But unquestionably, the IRS is a very aggressive, very strong tax authority. And it appears that a lot of the Western countries have taken their cues from them.
Well, it's interesting when you look at a situation a few years ago, there was a bit of a scandal where we were told IRS in the United States were going after pro-Israel groups. And what's scary about the IRS, at least in the United States, they are not checked at all. There is nothing that covers them. At least with the president, he could be impeached. The Congress could be not elected. The Supreme Court is at least picked, although they're there for the rest of their lives until they retire. So is that a bit of a concern that the IRS is not checked? And we talked a bit about that. But where did that come from, that idea that the IRS doesn't have a power over them?
I would say that in principle there should be checks and balances in relation to tax authorities. And it's probably true that very often these aren't monitored too closely. And in practice, they certainly have very extensive powers. We don't have too much experience in Israel of situations, at least that we're aware of, that the ITA, the Israel Tax Authority, has in fact employed its substantial power for non-kosher purposes. But it certainly could arise. So, when you ask that question, the kind of thought struck me immediately does, for example, the Minister of Finance or the government have some kind of control or monitoring mechanism to see exactly how they operate, they being the ITA, I have my doubts.
Again, this is the Ari Louis Show here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. We're speaking with Jeff Broide, talking about the economy and taxes. Now, let's talk about tax amnesty. Should people be giving serious thought to tax disclosure, giving your thoughts about tax amnesty?
Again, the answer is very much so. Given what's developed in recent years worldwide, the fact that people over the years developed all kinds of creative techniques of avoiding, or worse than that, probably evading taxes with via offshore tax havens or numbered bank accounts and so on, and various means that certainly didn't quite conform with the law. That's all pretty much history now. The banks, for example, financial institutions, are very much part of the new infrastructure of ensuring that taxpayers are in fact reporting and paying their taxes. And why am I giving you this by way of introduction here to what you asked is really because the information is all out there. There's tremendous exchange of information between tax authorities around the globe. The banks are certainly no longer the bastion of confidentiality that they might once have been conceived to be. And it's pretty high risk, so that people would be well advised to make a clean slate of it and go for voluntary disclosure and basically report what they should have been reporting and pay the taxes, because the alternatives are a lot worse.
Now, if they don't do that, is there a statute of limitation? And, I mean, how far does the amnesty go? Will there be penalties charged if they don't do that?
Look, the amnesty in Israel is an interesting one. First, they can go back 10 years. Generally speaking, there will be no penalties, so it makes it somewhat attractive. They will pay. The tax debts certainly are subject to interest and linkage and so on, but they will have to pay the actual tax debts. But this is a kind of unique opportunity that may well not return. And the current amnesty in its present format runs out in September this year. It may or may not be extended. This is the time. And there was an amnesty in Israel, you may recall, about a little over 2 years ago, and it had a pretty small response. Interesting enough, it was a more attractive amnesty than the current one. According to the ITA pronouncements, about 1,500 people have come forward so far in the current amnesty, which to my way of thinking sounds pretty low, and they're hoping for a couple of thousand. I would say that because I would imagine that there are many thousands out there. Bearing in mind that the tax amnesty also relates to not only income from abroad, but also income not reported here. And it would seem that there have been fairly large numbers of residents over the years who've not reported or not fully reported their income, their earnings, and so on. Here's the opportunity, as I said, to come clean. And particularly if we have a look at one particular aspect of it, and that's foreign assets and income, there is a major risk today or major problem in that if you haven't reported assets and income, then how do you access them in the coming years without exposing yourself to great risk? Great risk meaning the fact that you haven't complied with the law and therefore are subject to criminal proceeding.
Again, this is the Ari Louis Show here on IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio.com. Jeff Broide is my guest. I wanted to talk a bit about companies in Israel. Let's say someone owns a construction company, they have employees, they pay them under the table, which is a very common practice in Israel, sadly to say. They're not paying their taxes. Do the employees then have to take money and declare it on their own? Tell us about that process.
It's a good question, a pretty complex one, because it would appear here that both sides are party to criminal tax activity here. In other words, neither have reported. Both should be, so that the amnesty, it certainly in practice hasn't really focused on this type of situation, but I imagine would include it, so that probably the way to deal with it would be for the employer and the employees to come forward with an application to the ITA and try and resolve it sort of group format.
Okay, so with that situation, also, let's say this has been going on, they could theoretically go back to that period of time and then pay the taxes on those points from the 5 years of work?
Yeah, but the second part of the question, are we talking about how far back in terms of years?
Can they go, for example, let's say they wanted to be honest and they say, yeah, the last 6 years we haven't paid taxes the way we're supposed to, there was a confusion or whatever they would want to make as an excuse. They go to the tax authority and they say, I've had an employee, I want to pay his taxes. So he would have to pay all the 6 years since that employee's been working for him, correct?
Right. Well, the question here is whether he's in fact deducted the taxes and not paid them over to the tax authorities, or whether the employee didn't pay any taxes at all and they weren't deducted. If the former is the case, then there would be the employer who in fact is liable here for reporting and payment.
Okay, gotcha there. So it sounds like more responsibility is with the employer rather than the employee.
Right.
The employee, also, if you can clarify this, because I've heard different things, you make a certain amount of money that's under a certain limit. I was told you do not have to pay taxes, or it's very, very small. Do you know what that limit is, if that is true?
Again, irrespective of the amount, are we talking here about employees on a salary?
Yeah, let's talk salary, yes.
Either way, salaries are fully reportable in terms of the whole payroll reporting, whether the employee is subject to taxes or not. Depending on the status and the family situation of the employee, the amount that would be exempt from taxes could be anything from about 6,000 to 8,000 shekels monthly gross salary. They still would be subject to national insurance, Bituach Leumi, but it doesn't exclude them at all from reporting requirements.
Okay, so that exclude there. Again, this is the Ari Louis Show here on Israel Sports and NewsRadio.com. Thank you for joining us. Our guest is Jeff Broide. We're talking a bit about taxes here in Israel. Let's talk about how new tax laws, they relate to foreign trusts, because this is a big deal. A lot of people in Israel have foreign trusts, because a lot of people in Israel come from different countries. It's a very part of the population. So talk about how that will impact everyone, that new tax laws are on foreign trusts.
Trusts became taxable in Israel some years ago, really from about 2006, but only related to what defined as Israel resident trusts. In other words, a situation where the grantor or settler was in fact resident in Israel, or where there were Israeli resident beneficiaries and they were able to control such a trust. Mid-2013, the laws were changed, and effectively from 2014, any trusts which have Israeli resident beneficiaries are now subject to taxes in Israel, again depending on makeup of the beneficiaries, meaning, for example, if there were 4 beneficiaries, 2 were in Israel, 2 were outside of Israel, half the income or something similar would be taxable in Israel. There's a major issue that foreign countries have with the ITA, in that many professionals hold to the belief that if the trust is fully discretionary, that a beneficiary doesn't really have a legal right to anything. The ITA does not accept this tax-wise, and therefore there is a need to determine some type of percentage entitlement, even if this doesn't make legal sense, and it doesn't. But at the end of the day, the trusts are now reportable, and there are different routes and different approaches. For example, U.S. grantor trusts are taxed differently, first of all, because they already are reporting and paying taxes in the U.S., and therefore under the tax treaties there is a set of foreign taxes paid. Many other, the Anglo-Saxon countries, if the trust is foreign, then they may well not be paying taxes in their country of origin. So here, such trusts would be fully taxable in Israel, again, as far as they relate to Israeli resident beneficiaries.
Okay, now I want to move a little bit and talk about, we were talking earlier about amnesty, and what would be your counsel in regards to going back and figuring that all out, when you have to go through the process? So what would you counsel in that regard?
Look, again, depending on the amounts involved, and what I mean by that is that the ITA itself makes certain allowances for relatively smaller amounts. A case in hand issue of residential property owners in Israel who didn't report on and pay taxes on property income. The ITA has a facility where you can report going back to 2007 and pay the taxes due if it's residential income at 10% of the income. I certainly would counsel people who haven't reported property income to do just that. In relation to foreign assets and income not previously reported, again, here too, we would counsel, again, going back anything up to 10 years, whatever the relevant period is, in order to enable people basically to have full use of the funds going forward and also not be subject to criminal proceedings. The current amnesty arrangement provides specifically for excluding any danger of criminal proceedings.
The amount of money you would make, that's a small amount where someone would not have to pay taxes. We're talking about an employee. What about making money not as an employee, whether it's independent contractor or some other field? What is the amount there where they would not have to pay taxes or pay a small amount of taxes?
Look, if the amounts are similar. So if we, it could be, in current terms, it could be 70, 80, 90,000 shekels of net income a year. The problem with a self-employed person is that if they haven't reported over the years, they may well have no documentation, in which case it's a lot more complicated to substantiate any claims of how much income was earned. And the tax authorities would adopt a fairly tough approach. And also one wants to bear in mind that on earned income, the tax rates are much higher, anywhere between probably 20 to 50%. So that the independent taxpayer does have a serious problem here unless they're able to provide documentary evidence of, in fact, the income that they didn't report. And in many cases, this is not the case. They don't have such documentation.
Okay, all right. Again, this is the Ari Louis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Our guest has been Mr. Jeff Broide. And before we let you go, anyone out there listening, if they need some tax advice and they want to contact you, how can they go about doing that?
They can. One, we have a website, www.broide.com, and they can email me at Jeff, Jeff, at Broide, Broide.com. We'll be glad to help.
Okay, great. Thank you for being on the program. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Again, if you want to make a financial contribution to the program, you like what you heard, you can go to PayPal, type in IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. That's the PayPal. Again, IsraelSportsRadio@yahoo.com. My email is arilouisshow@hotmail.com, or you can email the station IsraelSportsAndNewsRadio@gmail.com. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you to my guest, Jeff Broide. Be well, everyone out there, and have a great day. Take care.